Good morning, everyone. My name is Kathleen Holt, and I use she, her pronouns, and I am an organizational development consultant. I work a lot with Coraggio Group, and I primarily focus on working with leaders and teams that are interested in developing equitable and inclusive processes. I'm really glad to be with you this morning. Sarah, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I just went off together for a second. Hi, I'm Sarah Strahl. I'm the city librarian for the city of Salem.
Oh, I have to get better at this. I have to say Sarah L or Sarah S. I was asking my co-facilitator, Sarah L. But thank you, Sarah S.
Sorry, I forgot about that too.
No worries. So I'm Sarah Lechner, and I'm a consultant with Coraggio Group, and really excited to be with you all today, launching this process and work together. I will be working with you throughout the strategic planning process, along with one of my colleagues who isn't here today, Chris Harder, another Coraggio Group consultant. So thank you for making the time to be here today.
Yes. And just to frame what we're doing today, we are here to build alignment on and a shared understanding of some tools to ensure that you can have an equitable and inclusive process through your strategic planning work. The main thing to remember is that an equity lens is really just a set of tools, but the use of the equity lens is actually really important. So we're going to do a little bit of both. We're going to co-create, building off of some tools that you already have and adapting them in a way that is useful for this group. And then we're going to practice using them. So that's the main thing to keep in mind as we move through. We have 4 tools to work on. First, though, I would love to go around and do a check-in with everyone. And I'm going to drop this prompt in the chat, and everyone has access. Oh, I do not see a chat screen. Does anyone have a chat?
So that's one of the issues with public meeting things that I don't think we discussed yet, Kathleen, that we can't use chat.
Okay.
So sorry.
Yeah. Everyone's just gonna have to have everyone's gonna have a good memory then. That's what it is. So what I would like to do is go around, and if you could share your name, your pronouns, the role you have with this project, so a connection to the library, and one word, just one word that describes how you're feeling right now coming into this meeting. Sound good? So I think it would be great if we could pass. So if someone's ready to start, share, and then pass, that would be great.
I can start.
Thank you, Alma.
Yeah, so I'm Alma Placencia. My pronouns are she, her. I am an adult services librarian with the Salem Public Library. And one word that I have right now is nervousness. So I'm going to pass this on to Lois.
Hi, I'm Lois Stark. I am the chair of the fabulous Library Advisory Board. I would say groggy, and I will pass it to Catherine.
Oh, there you go.
There. My name is Catherine Daniels. I'm the vice chair of the Library Advisory Board, and the advisory board plays an important role in making recommendations and providing advice to City Council on the library. And I'm anticipatory of what we're doing here today. And I pass it on to Virginia.
Thank you. My name is Virginia Stapleton. I use she, her pronouns, and I am your friendly city councilor from Ward 1. And one word, I'm not sure I have one word. I'm just coming back from vacation. So we got back from Montana last night. And so finding my email inbox and all of the things that come with coming off of vacation, maybe we should invent a word for that feeling. But excited, I think, to be here today would be a good one.
would you mind passing? Thank you for that.
Sorry about that. How about you, Keith?
Thanks. I'm Keith Norris, he, him pronouns. I am here today on behalf of the Parks and Rec Advisory Board. And my word for today is intrigued. I'm looking forward to the process and seeing how it plays out. I'll pass it on to Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate Van Emerson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Salem Public Library Foundation, and I use she, her pronouns. And I'm very interested in this subject. So interested is my word. And I will pass to Carol.
Carol, I think we still got you muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. Let me try again. I'm Carol Veller. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the chair of the board of the Friends of the Salem Public Library. And I'm going to echo Lois, groggy. This is a little early for me to be really functional.
Me too. Would you mind passing, Carol?
Right. Tricarico? I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Close. It's Tricarico. So I'm Tricarico. I use they, them pronouns. I'm actually a human rights commissioner, and I was one of the people who helped the commission develop an equity lens that we then proposed to the city. And my word is curious, and I will pass it to Dr. Brown.
Thanks, Tricarico. Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Brown, and I live in Ward 5. My role right there with Tricarico is I'm one of the creators of the equity lens that the city is using. And my word for today is thankful. And I will pass it on to, let's see, who's left? Who's left? Has Piper gone?
Hi, my name is Piper Martin. My pronouns are she and her. And I'm the Teen Advisory Board Secretary, and I'm also a sophomore at McKay High School. And my word for today would be focused. And I'll pass it to Clarissa.
Hi guys, my name is Clarissa. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the staff assistant for the library and your Zoom host today, and I'm happy to be here.
So I think
and I pass the baton to Norm.
Hi, everyone. My name is Norman Wright. I'm the Community Development Director at the city, and pronouns are he, him. And I think my word for the day is open. So open to learning more about all that we might share today. Thanks very much. And I don't know, I'm late to the meeting, so I'm not sure if I know of anyone else that needs to be called upon for the next introduction. Apologies.
No problem. Welcome. It's nice to see you. I think just Sarah, if you wanted to, Sarah S.
Yes, since I busted in and sort of introduced myself instead of Sarah L. I am the city librarian. My pronouns are she, her. And my word for today is soar. I hurt my foot, so I'm not mentally or emotionally sore, just physically.
Thank you. Great. Welcome, everyone. Glad that you're all here. I think we're going to go to Sarah L. briefly, and then we're going to come back and start getting into our work.
Great. Thanks. Wonderful to meet you all. And as you all know, this is the first step in our strategic planning process. So just wanted to give kind of a quick overview today. Want to get right into the work of the day as soon as possible and the conversations we're going to have, but wanted to make sure to give enough context around what's coming and how what we're doing today fits in to the rest of the work that you all will be doing together as the Salem Public Library Strategic Planning Steering Committee. So we are in the Get Clear, the first phase of the strategic planning process. So we break our process into these 3 phases. Get Clear is all about getting clarity. It's the phase where we're engaging with the community, we're getting input, we're understanding their perspectives and the needs of the community related to the library so that we can hold those voices in the room with us throughout the process. So we will soon be launching a survey that you'll see that will be going out far and wide. We'll be conducting interviews and focus groups. We'll also be doing some outreach to learn what other libraries are doing, a little bit of benchmarking and best practices related to some of the focus areas. We'll pull that all together into something we call a situation assessment. And as a strategic planning committee, you all will use that situation assessment, again, in the room with you throughout the Get Focused phase. The Get Focused phase is where we will be collaborating, meeting frequently, working together to use those inputs and insights from the community to start to shape the Salem Public Library's next 5-year strategic plan. So we'll do that through a series of working sessions together. It's an iterative process. We'll be going back out to the community with drafts and getting input and feedback along the way. And that will be happening over the course of the fall and into early winter. And then the 3rd phase, Get Focused, is about taking that plan and putting it into action. So this is more the action planning phase where we get more into roles, responsibilities, timelines, especially for those first couple years of the 5-year plan. So just wanted to give you this high-level overview, just a couple of other things that I'll share with you for context in terms of where we're headed. This is the strategic planning framework that we'll be using. And so you see down the left-hand side is what we call strategic clarity. All of those elements define who you are as an organization, what matters to you, what your role is, why you exist. So we'll work on those strategic clarity elements first, and then the strategic focus and strategic action elements are more about the work that you will do in service to that mission and vision and values. So we'll identify a couple of imperatives. We usually hold you to no more than 5 big focus areas for the next 5 years. Objectives, how you'll know if you're successful in those areas, and then initiatives are the actual projects and work that you'll take on to move forward in those imperative areas. This is just a sample of what we'll produce together at the end of this process. We'll put together a 1-page strategic plan. We really believe in the power of a 1-page plan that is accessible and usable, easy to reference. There'll be a lot more work behind this in the Get Moving phase with the actual implementation planning, but this will be the 1-page plan that really guides the work for the coming 5 years. So Lois, I see a hand. I'll take a couple questions here. We want to just give this kind of broad overview. So there's so much that we could talk about here, and we will as a committee. So I want to reassure you, we'll spend a lot more time on the framework and process together later. But Lois, yes.
I just wondered, could we by any chance get a copy of these things that you're showing?
Absolutely. Yes, okay. You bet. Great. Thank you. All right, and then just an overview of our agenda for today. And so you know what to expect. So as you saw in the email that we sent out, and as Kathleen described, the equity lens that we'll be building is really a set of tools. And so next we'll be going into working on that first tool, which is establishing group guidelines so that we can start to use those together right away. Then we'll hear about some of the existing work that has been done from some of the folks here with us in the room, the Zoom room. We'll then work on the second tool, which will be our definitions. We'll take a 15-minute break and ask you to do some reflection over the course of that break. We'll come back and work on the third tool, which will be our equity commitments. And then our fourth tool, DEI questions. And then before we close out, we'll talk a little bit about some of the high-level next steps and how we'll use what we developed together today. All right. Kathleen, I think I'm going to pass back to you to go into the guidelines, unless we have any other pressing questions or needs right now, or anything you want to add, Kathleen.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. All right. So we are going to get started on our first tool, but just a reminder, I know you know this, but it's a long meeting. So please be sure to take care of yourselves. So whatever that means, get some food, get something to drink, leave for a bio break if you need, stretch, doodle, fidget, pet your animals as they walk by, maybe pet your kids as I don't know, if your kids walk by, say hey. So, you know, there's just be really comfortable in this space. Because we are doing some really important work together that's going to help set the foundation for the work you have ahead. So just pace yourself for that. All right. So the first set of tools we're going to work on, or the first tool I should say we're going to work on, are group guidelines, sometimes called group agreements. So can I see a show of hands, either real or reaction? Who here has worked with group guidelines and agreements? All right, so couple folks, great. So just like the check-in question we did at the very beginning of the meeting, guidelines are a way to transition into a space. So a check-in question is a way of reintroducing yourself, getting grounded. The specific question we asked today was just to understand like how people are feeling so that we can understand the mood of the room. If we were in real life together, we might have a better sense of that, but right now we're relying on each other's words. And also I'm trying to read facial expressions best as I can. So guidelines are a set of tools that help us understand how we're expected to engage when we're in this space. And some of them might be really similar to how you would conduct yourself in other meetings. But when you're talking about things like diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism, it can get pretty emotional. It can get pretty uncomfortable. And so we want to remind you that that is okay. That's what this space is. And there are some ways that we might help each other contribute more fully. So that's what guidelines are. Any other thoughts from folks who have used agreements or guidelines on another way to think about their use in a process like this? Okay, so again, they're really to help create a space for equitable and inclusive engagement. All right, so I'm going to share screen and walk through, let me make sure I got the right one up. Walk through some guidelines that, again, all of these, and we're going to go a little bit more into this later, all of these are adapted from tools that many of the people in this space have helped work on. And so we're going to have a little time as well to hear about that history. But I did want us to have the guidelines before we started engaging in that way. So these are adapted from various documents, including the Exploring Together guidelines and a curriculum called Courageous Conversations About Race. Again, they're used to help you transition into a space so that you can show up more fully, to share, to explore, to reflect. And it can help you create a space that feels like one of trust so that you can take risks. So this is, again, this is a learning space. This is a co-creating building space. So these are all the ideas of the conditions we need individually and collectively to show up this way. So those of you who have been in groups that use guidelines or agreements before, some will probably sound familiar, but I am going to walk through them all. So confidentiality is an important one. One way to think about that is stories stay and learnings leave. So People, in order to be vulnerable and share, people need to understand that this is going to be held in confidentiality. I know that's hard because it's a taped meeting, but I'm just trying to say that this is a place where we want to be able to share those stories, and we don't want to repeat them outside of the room if they're not ours. But if they've made us think of something in a new way, we want to take that learning with us. Name and account for power dynamics in the room. I think when we're talking about equity, we're talking about power, and we cannot talk about power without talking about the inequities of how power is distributed, and that there are fixed hierarchies and fixed dynamics that show up either by title, for example, by an org chart, by identity, and that means race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, right? Ability. So all of these things can affect how we might feel in a space and how we can, the next one, step up or step back, or also called take space, make space. So one way of accounting for power dynamics is to recognize that, wow, I have a lot of power in this space, and I'm going to pause. If I'm usually the first one to talk, I might pause to make sure that no one else has something, right? Like coming off of mute might be really easy for you, might not be that easy for everyone because of power differentials. So take space, make space is one way to account for those dynamics. Moving to the fourth one, speak your truth and hear the truth of others. And so this is the one about vulnerability, right? This is the one about saying the thing you don't know, right? Maybe, or saying the perspective that you have. And it is matched with hearing other people doing that as well. So really being able to hold both things, even when they're contradictory, right? Being able to hold both things. And that leads into the next one, be open to perspectives that are different from your own. Really, really important that we understand that homogeneity does not have a place in equity work, and that norming does not have a place in equity work. Like that we are just saying, this is the way it is, the status quo. We really have to just be open to something that's beyond what we experience every day. So there's that one, and that can be uncomfortable. So the next one is to stay engaged, even when experiencing discomfort. You know, I have kids who are just like the mildest discomfort, and they're like, oh, and I'm always like, it is okay. You are going to get through this minute. And so I think for all of us to build our capacity with feeling a little uncomfortable in spaces where we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, it's really just a good muscle for us to build. Expect and accept non-closure. Guess what? We are not going to solve racism today in 3.5 hours, right? Like we've been working on this for a long time, and we are joining a flow of work, as we'll hear a little bit more about later. Okay. And then the last one, really, really important. There will be challenges, there will be successes. Challenges are a great opportunity to reflect and to learn and to grow. And the successes, we should name them and celebrate them, right? So at key points in your strategic planning process, when you have figured out that mission, vision, values, for example, you want to take a moment to name that and how hard that was and celebrate it. So we want to do the same thing here today. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. Any questions about these? Or something to add? I see Carol's hand.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but you know, we're live on YouTube, and I just don't understand the confidentiality thing under those circumstances. It's just like, no, this is not confidential. Anybody who wants to can be listening to anything we say.
You're right. And I would say that this is kind of an awkward gathering. I do think that there is something about the personal confidentiality, though, and the naming that not everyone will watch this, right? Just not everyone will. But you might hear a story from Virginia that is very personal in this space. And just asking that you don't go and share that story or repeat that story in another circle. Maybe that's a better way to think about it. But I hear you. Live meetings, let's put a little asterisk by confidentiality. If anybody wants to watch it, they will. But let's also own the power we have to hold the stories as best we can. Is that okay? Does that seem fair? All right. Good question. Anything else? Okay. Then my next question, so this is the part that I'm going to be really open as a facilitator and say, without a chat box, we're supposed to move into breakout rooms. Sarah's nodding with me. We're supposed to move into breakout rooms, and you are going to discuss these guidelines, but you won't have a way to take them with you. So if I could give you 15 seconds maybe to look at this list and think about the ones that resonate the most with you or that you have questions about.
Kathleen, I'm wondering too if folks could maybe like take a screenshot or just take a picture on your phone so you can bring these with you in some way.
Yeah, but so think about, I'm giving you the prompt in advance. Think about which of these, as I was reading them, you had some kind of physical reaction. Either like, yes, thank goodness it's there, or what does that mean? Like confidentiality and Carol, right? Like, what does that mean? So think about that. And then think about what else you might need in order to better participate in this space. So essentially recommending another guideline or agreement. Okay, and as Sarah said, maybe, yeah, and Sarah, I have the prompt in that other doc if you want to go into that one too. All right, so I think if that's good, and if Sarah, if the breakout rooms are ready.
Clarissa?
Yeah, just, okay.
And Sarah?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to go to the breakout rooms, but one just note is that for a public meeting, we do need those breakout rooms to be documented. So you'll be in pairs for this breakout. So if you all could identify someone in your pair to please take notes, and we'll give you instructions on where to send those notes and follow up, probably to Clarissa. Or you may have the option to record your breakout room if you choose to do that. Either way, we'd like to encourage you to take notes so that we have that backup documentation. Anything else logistically before we open the breakout rooms?
No, I think it's a few, how many minutes is it? I lost track of my.
Yeah, we are 7 minutes.
Right. And then we're going to come back and share out. And so just really like the top notes, like, oh, we would like to see this guideline added, or we have additional questions about this guideline, things like that. Okay, whenever you're ready.
All right. All right. We'll see you all in 7 minutes.
Okay, that chat box is going to mess me up. So let me think.
Yeah, and I think just one thing to be aware of, Kathleen, is I think this room will be recorded.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yep.
So the chat box is going to mess me up. So I have to figure out, that might have been the hardest one. No, the question also will be hard.
What if we do what we just did here and we put the prompts into the document and then ask people to,
They don't have a link to this document.
Right, but just to take a photo or a screenshot.
Oh, sure. Sure, that sounds good. And then also the other thing is you, I think, are doing the slide for break, right? I'm just trying to close windows on my.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can.
I think you do the definitions and then introduce the break and the prompt. So
okay, I can do
you might
that.
have to just break amount. We'll just see where we are in time.
Yeah, okay.
And then if you can leave the slide up during break, maybe. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Just do screen as a slide. So we're gonna have to do more share screen than I really like.
Yeah.
But so I'm gonna close that tab because I don't need to use it, right?
Okay. No, I've got it. For the presentation.
Great. Okay, and then you'll take notes on guidelines. I see.
With the definitions, I had hoped to be able to put that in the chat as well, because that's a lot of information.
We could email the link. It's view only, so no one will be able to edit. And let me double check. Actually, I'm making a quick note here. Hard to do with a public meeting. Okay. Let me double check these settings because we could email it to everyone or ask. Let's see, anyone on internet with this link can view. So if you go, let me see, do you have?
We're not going to be able to chat the link.
No, but can you email it?
Yeah. Okay. So let me.
Yeah, and if you go into share, if you're in that draft, and if you go into share, you should be able to grab the link there too.
Yeah, I got it. So I'll email everyone.
And if you send it by email, just make sure you blind copy everybody just to follow public meeting law as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And Clarissa, it's so funny to have your name next to my name because my younger sister's name is Clarissa. And it's not that common of a name. And so every time I see Kathleen and Clarissa together, I think of her. There's Norm. Okay.
I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, and Norm, I don't know if you'll have Norm's email then, but.
I do, because yeah, okay.
Oh my goodness. I gotta go on mute. There's like sneezing and banging around. I'll be right back. Sarah, I don't have a timer. How much time do they have?
I think we have about 2 more minutes. I think we started right at 9:30, so around 9:37 or 9:38.
And you'll give them a notice or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm going to take off people who are not at the meeting. So we didn't have Sandy. Sending a message, give them a minute. All right, I just closed the rooms, but it'll still give them 1 minute to get back.
Welcome back.
Wow, we were super on it there.
I'm a high achiever.
Welcome back. Welcome back, everyone.
Quick question. Who do we send our notes to?
I think it's going to make the most sense for those to go to Clarissa. Clarissa, do you agree?
Yes, you guys can send it to the admin email and I can provide it whenever you guys are ready.
And we do have one more breakout room later today. So if it makes sense to kind of hold and then send at the end.
Yeah.
Just as a heads up. All right. I think that's everyone. Trying to remember the dimensions of the screen.
Yeah.
That's everyone. Great. Okay. I would love to hear any comments or feedback or anything else that people would like to see added to the guidelines. And Sarah will be taking notes. Sarah L.
And just a heads up too, that I did just email everyone a link to this document, which you'll have access to view. And so if it's easier for you to pull this up on a separate screen, it probably will be helpful for other portions of the conversation today. Feel free to jump in there.
Thanks. Alma.
Yes. So in my group, we talked about how the guideline be open to perspectives that are different from your own. You know, talking about that in the context of remembering to be respectful of each other and seeing each other's humanity. We also talked about how, you know, we don't always have to agree, but we can commit to completing, you know, a task. So in this case, we're developing this equity lens. So we might not always agree with each other, but if we can commit to complete the task, that's something that came from our conversation.
You know, Alma, that reminds me of a guideline I like to use. It goes something like, take responsibility for the success of our work. Would that help with the second thing you said? And I see Sarah made a note about the being open to perspectives. Great, yeah. Okay, because that means, because we all do share that, right? It's not like on me and Sarah or on, you know, whoever else in that space. It is all of us. Great. Thank you. Anything else that came up in your pairs? Any needs, any questions, any concerns? Virginia?
Yeah, I was with her and I would just say that not, some of our differences are not seen. They're very hidden and the experiences are unique. And so to just stay mindful of that, that somebody can be bringing so many different lived experiences to the table that are not seen for all, if that makes sense.
That does. Let's see, I thought, is Kate, are you off mute? I see Lois's hand too, but I think Kate might have been off mute. Yeah.
So I was with Piper and we talked a little bit about just it's the third item, step up, step back, take space, make space. Other groups that I've worked with these kind of guidelines with have had a thing of to just be self-aware and ask yourself, why am I talking? and that can help you kind of, if you tend to be a person that talks a lot and thinks as you talk, that can kind of help you condense and maybe not speak as much as, and give other people space.
Yeah. Thank you. And Lois?
I was with Sarah S. and we talked about expect and accept non-closure, because we're both sort of, we want to get things done, we want to solve everything, and we can't do that, and that's okay, and that's kind of hard for me to accept, but I will do my best.
Thank you for naming that. And I'm right there with you. It's a hard one for me too. Any other needs that came up, or questions or wonderings that we would like to capture? Let me tell you what's going to happen with, I think each of these tools, we'll work through them, again, building off of work that's already been done. And then we're going to ask for this group to approve that and commit to the tool to be used. At least today, we might modify next meeting, for example. So that's what we're striving to get to a place where everyone is thumbs up. I can work with these agreements. Sarah S.
I feel really good about these agreements. I definitely, with what Kate was saying about the step up and step back, I'm in a odd position in this group, I think. And so definitely want to take my own ability to step back. And so I want to make space for other people to disagree. But I love that we started with some stuff that came from other documents and history, and we're able to add our own things.
Yeah. Thank you for naming that. All right. I'm not seeing any other gesture that people have something to say. So I'd like to move us to approving this list. And again, all of these tools are living documents. And so as we use them, we might find something's missing or something needs to be reworded. But just to say, for today, Sarah and I will go back and make the edits noted so that they're actually captured there. Can I see approval of this in the form of a thumbs up, either real or virtual? And what this means is I will show up thinking about these guidelines. This is how I'm going to show up today in this space. Great. Thank you. Sarah, were you watching? I think we have everyone, or most everyone.
Still, I think, waiting on Norm and Dr. Brown. Apologies if I missed it.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Thank you, Norm.
You. All right. Thanks, Sarah, for watching and taking notes. Great. Okay. And if you could, thank you. Sarah knows I don't like share screen. I like to see everyone. So it's very appropriate, Sarah S., how you ended your comment, because I think what's really important in this work is that it is evolving and growing, and we're not inventing anything. There have been people who've been working on this. And so we want to take some time to understand and hear a little bit of the background of some of the work groups and some of the documents that we are building on today. So again, this is a way of honoring the work that has been done, seeing it, validating it, and then building upon it so that it can be useful to this group. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to hear from a few people in this space to share with us their experience with some of these documents or processes. And Alma, if I could invite you to share for maybe 5 or 6 minutes. So that would be, doing math on YouTube. I think 9:54 or so. Does that work? Thank you.
Yeah, so I had the privilege of being a part of Oregon Libraries Association's special Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion and Anti-Racism Committee. So we had this project with the Oregon Library Association to create a toolkit regarding talking about some of these principles and best practices that we can share out with public libraries and academic libraries and school libraries in the state of Oregon. So we ended up producing this toolkit that's available online. It's also published on the OLA website, as well as the State Library of Oregon's website as well, as a free resource for library professionals to use and to sort of like take away and learn from. And what else? Yeah, in it we have various resources that people can go ahead and sort of continue their education on these topics. And yeah, I mean, I think that's basically it.
Great. Would it be helpful for me to share screen? So I think everyone was emailed the documents that we'll be referring to.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any part, Alma, that you want me to share screen, or do you feel like you're good?
I think pretty good. Yeah.
Great. Well, it is an amazing toolkit. Thank you, and to everyone involved with working on this. I see a hand. Catherine? I think you're still on mute.
Catherine, you're muted.
Yes, we did get the OLA anti-racism 2-page piece, but we didn't get the larger toolkit.
Oh.
And no,
I think so. I can double check the email. I'll resend it if not. That one was too large to attach, so it was a hyperlink.
So, but I did I did get it through Lois, who got it through was it the Library Foundation? Anyway, and it's wonderful because it translates all these abstract ideas into concrete, substantive things that we can do. So that's what I have to say about that. So it's great reading.
Thank you.
I agree. And the graphics that depict the ideas, I thought it was really, really good tool. Alma, how long is the group still meeting and still working, or how long was this process?
Yeah, so the entire toolkit process was 9 months. And all of this was volunteer work. So in total, I probably dedicated about 160 hours to this toolkit, just not getting paid for it, just getting it done, along with a committee of the Oregon Library Association. So there was representatives from academic libraries, public libraries, and school libraries that also were content writers for this toolkit. The committee is yearly, so now we are onboarding new co-chairs to take over my position and also my chair's position as well. So yeah, and I think whatever their goals are, we're going to support them. So yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing with us and also for your labor on this project. And again, the best thing we can do in honor is to use it, right? And so, we are sharing a lot of the different tools and we are adapting them again. So this is not something that we necessarily will be using directly in this space, but I just wanted to make sure that we understood the context of that. Anything else? I see Lois's hand. Yeah.
Well, as Alma was talking about that, I thought of what I had read, that she should have been paid for that.
Thank you for naming that. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. If nothing, no other questions for Alma, then I think we are gonna invite Sarah S. to share a little bit, and I think it's maybe the DEI committee, is that correct?
Oh, yeah, the staff one. Yeah, actually, so the staff committee has spent the first few weeks, and similar to this group, I can't really share specific stories from that group or any lived experience from that group, but we've spent the first few meetings actually just on the agreements and on what our goals are. And so this committee has just been formed fairly recently for staff, at least this iteration of it. And I'm extremely grateful that I get to be a part of it and get to, work on some of the internal citywide DEI things that are happening. And there's also a consultant group, Moss Adams, I believe, was the one who worked on the initial DEI. They referred to it as DE&I plan. And so there have been changes made like at the HR level from that plan, but it was taking that initial scope of work and research that they did and the things that they found and going from there and taking it to the next level. So I'm very excited about it, but I wasn't as involved in the initial document creation and stuff like that, other than, answering survey questions and talking to Moss Adams about DE&I needs at that point.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us a little bit of that. And we are drawing from that plan, I believe, for definitions, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Any questions or thoughts? Okay. And I would like to invite, I believe it will be Tricarico and Dr. Brown, or I'm not sure, sharing with us a little bit about the Human Rights Commission's draft equity lens. And so we have about maybe 7 minutes.
Okay, well, I'll start with a quick intro and then pass it to Dr. Brown. So in response to some of the many decisions that City Council made over the past few years, I proposed creating an equity lens to try to make some better decisions in the future. And we started looking at a lot of examples, other lenses like other cities, other libraries. We also spoke to Bunny McKenzie Mack, which is a consulting group out of Chicago. We did multiple meetings. This was over the past year where we discussed this. And then luckily, Dr. Brown joined us and volunteered to help us, who has some great expertise. So I'll pass it to him to kind of talk about the things that he brought to the table, because we were really, really lucky to have him join us.
Thanks, Tricarico. Again, it's an honor to be here to share about this tool. And I'm really going to echo what Commissioner Tricarico just said. This was a team effort. We spent quite a bit of time all last year of meeting, usually sometimes several meetings a month and whatnot, and talking on the phone. But the hindsight behind the tool is bringing people into a place and a space where they can have courageous conversations about race. And when the dominant voice is white, talking about race can be very uncomfortable. And so when we look at the city of Salem and we look at the demographics, it's very important that we understand who is at the table and whose voices are missing that are not at the table. And so when you think about, just the purpose of the Human Rights Commission and all the commissioners, their goal has always been to create a space where people can be seen, heard, validated, and supported. And looking at this tool, the city of Salem is definitely trying to do better in those areas when it comes to having racialized conversations, when it comes to hiring people that are really not white. And so that is a struggle. That is a struggle not only for the city of Salem, but for a variety of different communities throughout the country. And so the mindset behind the equity tool is helping individuals to not only see race, but to have a conversation around race, to talk about what it feels like when a person of color is invisible. What does it feel like when a person of color is experiencing microaggressions? And the equity lens is not a tool where we just disregard other inequities. For example, children with learning differences, or talking about socioeconomic status. Those are important as well. Yet the purpose of an equity lens is to center race. And when we read about Glenn Singleton and all of his work with Courageous Conversations, it is being able to have a conversation and keeping race at the center of the discussion. And so the work in going forward is just exactly what that is having a space where all voices can be heard, seen, and affirmed and validated. So that's a little bit more the makeup behind it. So if there are any questions, feel free to let me know.
Thank you so much to both of you, not just for presenting, but for your labor. Yes, Virginia.
Thanks. Hey, Dr. Brown, Virginia here. And I guess I just want to ask a question about that last comment you made, where how does one, or how does a group like this, focus on race, but also include all of the different issues on the table, whether it's gender or sexuality or socioeconomics? Like, how do we balance that conversation?
Well, counsel,
or maybe it's not balanced.
No,
just please correct me.
It's a great question, because I think you and I have had conversations about this in the past. One of the struggles, and I'm just going to put this into the space, I am a man of color. And when I enter into a space, and although you cannot see my face currently, I am a person of color. And so when I enter into a space, that is the first thing that people notice when I enter into a space. And notice I'm making this personal. I'm not speaking on behalf of all African Americans, and nor am I speaking on behalf of all members of the BIPOC community. It's when I enter to a space, you do not know my religious beliefs, you do not know my socioeconomic status, nor do you know if I have a certain learning difference or disability. You do not know my zip code, where I live, you know none of that. But the one thing you do know about me is that when I enter to a space, I am a Black African-American man. That is very visible. And so how does one balance having a conversation about equity when there are so many other inequities going on? That is a great question. And so in a room like this, and I'm not familiar with what the facilitators are going to be, their direction, what is crucial in a conversation like this is you have to have members at the table that can identify and notice. If you look at our names, if you just looked at our names right now of all the participants, you'll notice that many of us have used our pronouns. That is a signal that says, hey, I want you to know not only who I am, but this is how I'm entering to the space. But one thing you do not notice that no one described how they racially identify, right? None of us put, well, I'm white, or maybe I'm Native American. None of us put that there. But that is a part of who our identity is. That's a part of us. And so how do we have that conversation? We have to be willing to use the tools that the facilitators have given us. And when I think about Courageous Conversations, one of the 4 agreements is agreeing to stay engaged. That means when I am uncomfortable, I'm still going to lean in, and I'm going to trust the process, whereby if it's uncomfortable for me to talk about race, eventually I'm going to get better at it. So the balancing act is really centering a conversation on race and then building on top of that. And the last thing I'll say, because I know the facilitators have this timed and I don't want to take up their time. When the last thing that I'll say is, Maya Angelou said it perfectly. She says, people may not recall what you say, but they will always remember how you feel, how they made you feel. And that's important because if you understand a person's feelings, you are knocking on the door of empathy. And if you can knock on the door of empathy, now you can hold space and grace for anyone that's going to enter that particular room. And the way that you do that is that you acknowledge all parts of them. You acknowledge their race, which is primary, and then you build on top of that. It's a difficult balance, but it's one that's necessary.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Go ahead, Tricarico.
I really appreciate Dr. Brown showing that. He's taught me a lot. I want to speak from my perspective as a white person that, to answer your question, Virginia, is staying connected to communities who are not like me, right? Because the world of whiteness really wants to make it easy for me to forget all the privileges I have. And I can remember being involved in DEI work before I started talking about race, and I really thought I was doing it, but it was real ineffective, right? It was like a turtle with a squirt gun thinking they're an army general, not even close. So to answer your question, it's doing your own personal work and continuing anti-racist work outside of workshops like this. It's paying Black people, people of color, Indigenous people to talk about that and unpack that, right? Like that's the commitment. Like these are really, really amazing commitments for this space, but we're not gonna be able to use some of the tools here every day if we aren't keeping those commitments every day. So, it's really important to stay connected to those communities, because I swear every time I think I know an issue or I understand it, I talk to someone in the community and I'm like, wow, okay, here's another layer that I'm not even aware of. So it's really important to keep that front and center in our daily lives.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Great conversation. Again, thinking about the guideline, right, that we are going to expect and accept non-closure. So we are going to continue this conversation. We're going to stay engaged. Thank you for asking hard questions. Thank you for kind of committing to the work together, and it's ongoing. All right, so thank you for that history, and thanks to all of you who have been involved in building a foundation for us to continue building on. I think I'm going to pass it over to Sarah L. for the next part.
Thanks, Kathleen. And thanks to Alma and Sarah, Tricarico, and Dr. Brown for giving us an overview of some of the work that's been done that we'll be building on. So as we walked through the agenda today, we mentioned that we'll be building an equity lens that's composed of these 4 tools. So we've worked on the guidelines. The next tool that we're going to be working on are some shared definitions. So as we work together as a strategic planning steering committee over the coming, whatever it's going to be, 9 months, we want to make sure that we have some shared understanding around what we mean when we say diversity, when we say equity, when we say inclusion. So those are the ones that we're going to start with. There's many different ways to define these things, but what's important is that we identify, and again, coming back to what Kathleen said earlier, working definitions. We may adapt or shift these along the way. We'll check in frequently about how we're using them and if they're still working for us. So today we want to look at those 3. We'll use some starters that have come from the Salem's DEI plan, as well as the Oregon Library Association's anti-racist statement. So we'll start with those. And again, just like we did with the guidelines, we'll consider them and we'll think about how these are going to serve our work as a committee. So I think I'll share my screen here, and I'm going to, again, just like we did with the guidelines, we'll share some to start with. So there's quite a bit here. So what you'll see for each of these, for diversity, equity, and inclusion is a definition, and then an example of what this looks like in application. And so we sent the link. It looks like a lot of you are in this document. And so this might be a place where it makes sense to pull up the Google Doc on another screen, because the first step is we're just going to pause and give everyone a little bit of time to read through these 3 definitions. I will, for anyone who doesn't want to pull up the Google Doc, I'll hold this page for a bit and then scroll down lower so that you can see all 3: diversity, equity, inclusion. And this is what the reflection prompt. So as you're reading through, this is what we'll come back and discuss together. As you're reading through these definitions, I want you to consider, what feedback do you have? What questions do you have? What resonates in these definitions or examples of application? What's surprising or different than definitions you've either used in the past or what you expected? Are there any that feel confusing? You have questions about that are unclear. So again, our goal today is to come to some shared understanding and a place just like we did with the guidelines that we feel good. Yes, we can use these as our shared definitions. So this will be your opportunity to share any places where it feels unclear or make any suggested edits or changes. So that's kind of the assignment, again, to read through these and consider those things. Before I stop talking and make sure we have enough silence for people to do that, any questions on just what we're up to right now? All right, so we will be comfortable with the silence while we give everyone a chance to read through these and consider. All right, I want to check in and just see how folks are doing. Would people like more time? Where you're at? Maybe a thumbs up if you're good to go and start the conversation. And totally okay if anybody wants more time. Please just let me know. Okay, looks like
I'm good.
Okay, looks like so far seeing thumbs up and people are good to go. Okay. So just like we did with the guidelines, want to hear your reactions, what resonates, what questions do you have, anything that's surprising or different? I'll just open it up for dialogue. Great, I see Catherine's hand.
I know the city has worked hard to develop these definitions, and I guess I don't see any reason why a city service like the library should have use any different definitions, or why we should reinvent the wheel.
Thanks for that, Catherine. Yeah, and our intent today is to identify definitions that this particular group feels comfortable using in the strategic planning process. So, it's our opportunity to vet them for this process alone. And the library, may continue to choose to use these definitions for other work of the library, but we're really thinking about this particular committee and making sure we're all clear and comfortable. Thank you. Yeah, Virginia.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I feel the same. They sound great. There is one word that I really struggle with all the time. Maybe we can start a conversation about that, and that's disabled. My kiddo is differently abled, and so maybe we could start a conversation about that. I don't know how people feel about that term, if they feel that it is derogatory or if they feel that it's, I don't know how else, but I struggle with that word personally, and I always refer to people as differently abled. But that, of course, is an imperfect word as well, so maybe we could open it up.
Thanks so much for raising that, Virginia. Tricarico, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because, there are different terms that different people use. And I've actually heard the opposite, that there's a lot of people who prefer disabled, right? And not differently abled. So I don't know what the answer is, but I do want to acknowledge that everybody has different ways that they define themselves. So maybe adding additional terms in there could be helpful. But I wouldn't want to necessarily take out disability because there are people who use it.
Yeah, thanks. And that's what I kind of hoped to put out in my question, was that it's a struggle for me, and just knowing the right terminology and to be sensitive and all of those things. So just wanted to start it. Thank you.
Thanks for raising that, Virginia. And what I heard and what Tricarico said was maybe rather than changing it or removing it, we also add the language differently abled, so that we're a bit of a both and. Great. Kathleen, would you be willing to note that? It looks like you're in there. Okay, great. Thank you. Keith.
Yeah, I think so. Reading through these definitions, one of the things that kind of struck me is I feel like they're, and I don't know the city's whole history around developing these, and I agree with kind of Catherine's thing. I don't know that we want to recreate it or deviate too far from what the city documents have approved. But I feel like they're missing, at least the equity and inclusion pieces are missing a level of intentionality and a level of action, action-oriented phrases in there. And so particularly with inclusion, right, I think it's missing the idea that we're creating a culture, and I guess it has created in there, but the idea of creating a culture in there to do it, but also missing the feeling, right? And I think inclusion is, in my mind, is very feeling based, where people feel that they're welcomed, right? And so stating that everyone can participate or everyone belongs doesn't necessarily get at the idea that they feel like they are welcomed or desired to be a part of the group. And so that was a piece that I felt like was missing in there. And then with the equity, everyone has access to the resources, and I guess I would just phrase that in a more proactive way of having of equity is kind of actively providing those resources in an accessible way. So just a little bit of a reframing, I guess, in my mind of how I think about them, and maybe in the context of what we would get at with a library strategic plan is making these more of an action oriented.
Great, thank you so much for those comments, Keith. And I see Sarah Strahl has her hand up. Kathleen, I know this is something I've also heard you speak about in the past, just kind of, is equity a verb, a noun? Like, how are we using these words? And so if there's anything that you want to add related, but Sarah, let's hear from you first.
I really like that we have the applications. I feel like that's where some of the action gets added in, but I also wanted to speak to something that Keith said, which is the welcoming piece. Like, inclusion is almost, it almost isn't anything without that welcoming and inviting in too. And that's something that I feel like those two balance each other out really well, the welcoming and inclusive. Also, because there are times when, if you're including the broadest umbrella you can, there are groups that could consider themselves a part of that might make other groups feel unwelcome. And so there's a balance there of the welcoming and inclusiveness that I think are important to acknowledge, even though I'm always trying to solve it, but we're not going to solve it today, and I'm trying to remember that. So thank you, Keith, for that point. I really kind of wanted to build on that.
Yeah, and I wanted to echo, Sarah, your appreciation for the application, which we adapted from the OLA statement on anti-racism. And I think, Keith, you have some good points. And I think some of them are addressed in the application parts. But one thing I'll note about inclusion, and just as something to consider, to keep in mind, is that inclusion that is just welcome, but that doesn't include access to power, is not actually very helpful. So saying people, oh yeah, you're here and welcome, but you don't get to actually contribute or in a meaningful way to the conversation, or we aren't actually hearing your voice. We aren't giving you power to affect this process. We aren't giving you the power to say, thanks for the seat at the table. I want a different seat, right? Or I don't want to be at this table, or this table is ridiculous. So I guess I just want to say that the application part, inclusion means that we empower and invest in folks. I think that's also really important to keep in mind.
Thanks, Kathleen. Dr. Brown?
Thank you so much. And I think it's also valuable to bring into the space, I heard the word power used a couple of times. I think, Sarah, was that you talking previously about power?
That was Kathleen.
Kathleen, my apologies. So I think it's wise to unpack that particular word, because when we come into meetings like this, and Tricarico said this earlier, along with Virginia, we said the same things in regards to who's in the room. And so when we use words like power, it's important to unpack power. For example, as an African-American man, I know that my ancestry line, I know that I came from slavery. I know that my great-grandparents were born into slavery. I also know that being Black and having that type of lineage in my life is a group of people that did not have power. And so power is very much connected with how people racially identify. And so when you think about power, there's another P word that follows it automatically, and that's going to be privilege. And so throughout this discussion, I think it would be valuable, especially for people who are the dominant voice, when they hear that word power, to understand how it's used and also who does it impact, right? So when you think about power, there is impact and there's intent. Some people may have good intentions, yet the impact could be profound. It could be tragic. And so it's worthy to understand when we say power, who has the power and also who does not have the power. And so I'm not too sure exactly where we'll be in the next hour or so, but I think there's value in unpacking that particular word, power, privilege, because right behind that, you're going to have to eventually deal with white supremacy. And that's a word where right now I can't read the faces of anyone when they hear that word, but that's a loaded word. Is it a word that we need to understand? Yes, it is, because it's right there when we think about inclusion. Because if we want to really embrace, and I think Keith said this earlier also, about, you know, having empathy and making sure that, you know, that people are seen and making sure that people are respectful. The opposite of inclusion would be people who have power to exclude others. And so bringing that into the space and unpacking that, I think there's value and purpose there. So I just want to like bring that into the space.
Thank you so much for doing that. That is a really, it feels like a very big word, the word power. And it isn't a word that we've defined. I've made a note, maybe it is one we want to. My simplest definition, though, if this is helpful, is I think of power as really the ability to make choices for oneself and for others. And that can be choices around resources, choices around access, and that means limiting the choices of others, as well as increasing your own access. So for me, I think of power in this sort of simple way, like who gets to make the choices, the decisions, right? And that it leads into things that are much bigger and much more loaded, which is money, right? Generational wealth, housing, food security, right? And these are all racialized. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so when we say in our agreements that we want to account for those dynamics, it's not fix them, right? But we want to make sure we're understanding where that power is and where it isn't. And that the work of equity is to really grapple with that and say, are we okay with that? So as you go through your strategic planning process and you're thinking about resources and initiatives and imperatives, that question of who has access, who is able to make the decision about access and resources is an important one.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Thanks, Kathleen. Yeah, Lois.
I think, I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself, but when I looked at the word or the definition of inclusion that said empower and invest in folks who have not been seen, heard, protected, and respected as they deserve, I brought it down to the library. Is that okay to bring that in right now? Because I guess I don't want to forget that at times there have been discussions about, you know, who we serve at the library, and the fact has been brought up that those people don't use our library. Well, there's not stuff for them to use. And so, and then it comes down to money, etc. So I'm just making a note to myself and kind of putting it out there that if we don't have like Russian books because they don't seem to come to our library, how does that work?
Thank you, Lois. Yeah, I think that's exactly why we're having this conversation right now, right? Is to dig in, discuss, find shared meaning with these definitions so that we can do exactly what you're doing right now, is, you know, apply it to the decisions, the choices that we'll be making related to the strategic plan. So thank you. All right, what else?
It's okay if I ask a question to Sarah or Kathleen.
Please.
So I just heard the statement from one of our participants, those people. I think that would be helpful if someone could unpack that. Like, I think I understand what she's saying with those people, but I think it would be helpful if one of the facilitators could unpack that word or that statement.
I was using that in quotes. I didn't say that. That's what I heard.
Yeah, Dr. Brown, I don't know if you could see Lois, but she was kind of using air quotes around that statement to illustrate something that she has heard said about the library's patrons, who does and doesn't use the library. But this is also just an important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kathleen.
One thing I wanted to say though, this is about intent versus impact, which is what I heard Dr. Brown referring to. And so in the same way that there are certain words that just repeating them repeats a harm, you know, then I think what I'm hearing is that there was a little bit of a pause there, a little bit of an ouch, if that language makes sense. So when we're in spaces and we're talking about inequity, and sometimes we repeat harmful words, even if it wasn't us that said it, it can still land. And so I appreciate, Dr. Brent, I missed it, and I appreciate you catching it and naming it for us. Yeah.
Great, we've got a couple more minutes to spend here. Yeah, Virginia.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to be vulnerable here for just a second. So as a woman, I always like to see women represented as a group that's, I guess maybe a minority group, or however we want to say that. And I see gender identity listed on the different identities. But can we kind of flesh that out? How is that different than sex? I don't see sex on here. I see sexual orientation, but that's kind of the closest we get to that. Is that, are we, you know, are 50% of the world population represented here in this group? That's my question.
Thanks for bringing that up, Virginia. Anybody want to field this? I mean, so
See a couple hands.
Yeah, okay, great. Tricarico and then Catherine.
Yeah, so gender identity is just how people identify, right? So if you are a cisgendered person, that means you identify with the gender that you were assigned at birth, right? So if you were a cis woman, right, you were assigned female at birth, you also identify as a woman. Sex usually refers to like biology and chromosomes, which is actually quite a bit more diverse than people realize. So when we're talking about gender identity, you know, we're not excluding women, right? Because gender identity includes, you know, people who have X chromosomes and also identify as a woman or as female, right? Similarly, it would also include people who have XY chromosomes and identify as male, right? So I guess I would want to know, maybe there was a confusion there, or you know, like I'm not sure what was missing from that to prompt that question, other than maybe not understanding that gender identity includes literally everyone, because everyone has a gender identity.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think I wanted to have the conversation so that this dialogue could be out there, because I think a lot of people don't always understand all of the different things that you just laid out so beautifully. But I also wanted to make sure that the gender identity piece also included that we were all maybe thinking of the same thing, or that it did include cisgendered folks that maybe identify as women, or different minority groups. So just wanted to make sure that that was a collective thought process, and that we were all on the same page.
Thank you both. So we're going to spend a couple more minutes here before, just like with the guidelines, we ask, are these definitions that we feel good using as our shared definitions, knowing that they will be living definitions, we can adapt them along the way. Carol, you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you. I guess I'm a little unclear. I mean, I agree with people who've said, you know, let's not reinvent the wheel, but I'm a little unclear whether we are, as it were right now, editing this document or at least making notes about how to edit this document to make it better fit what we're about in this group. And I just have an example under inclusion applied. The last sentence says it means that we ensure that they have opportunities to thrive and advance their careers. Well, you know, that's not applicable to what we're about here. We're, you know, we ensure that they have opportunities to thrive and I don't know what words to use here, but
yeah,
you know, to thrive and have the choice to use the resources of the library and have the resources of the library be responsive to what they need from the library, right? So
yeah,
whoever it is. So
thanks.
So there are two parts to that, obviously. Question and then like how to fix that.
Thanks, Carol. Yeah. So to answer your first question, Kathleen is making notes, and we will take what we heard today and make some recommendations in terms of any edits or adaptations that we'll bring back to this group in our next meeting together. And again, you know, these will be dynamic and living documents. So we'll, you know, share back any proposed changes that we might be making based on what we're hearing today. The important part of today is having the dialogue and bringing these things up more so than getting stuck in like wordsmithing as a group. So that's why we're kind of capturing these things. We'll make some proposals. And then the piece that you mentioned about their careers, great example of where, you know, we've taken this from something else. So that was taken from the City of Salem plan. And so that's a place where we could broaden that to make it more inclusive. I think careers is relevant for the folks who work at the library, and yet we also want that to be broader for everyone who is served by the library in some way. So, so great note, and we'll think of a way to broaden that. I want to make sure that we get to transition pretty quickly to our break and that we have time for the reflection. Catherine, I noticed you came off mute. Do you have a comment or question? Okay, you're good. All right, so I'm going to ask if we can, just like we did with the guidelines, use thumbs to indicate if we're feeling like this group of working definitions work for us right now, knowing we've captured some notes where there's some nuance or some places we're going to want to probably make some additions or adaptations going forward. Do we feel like these are starting to bring the shared understanding around these terms that we need to work together as a group? So thumbs if you're feeling good and able to move forward. Great. I think I'm seeing everyone, but you, Norm. Norm might be great. Thanks, Norm. Appreciate it. Okay. So On the break, we are going to ask you to reflect on a prompt. Kathleen, do you want to frame up these questions?
Sure. For the next part, we're going to talk about our commitment to the work. And there is some commitment language that the commission put together, which we adapted. And to get us to that space, we're going to do some story sharing. So one of the ideas around stories is that they are a kind of data. And I saw the word data used in the equity lens questions. And so I just want to open up our thinking about stories and lived experiences as valid types of data. So we're going to share a story. The first one is thinking of a time when you felt truly included. And we're really focusing on conditions and circumstances. So like what made that possible? And then the second one is something that you witnessed that was unjust. And again, thinking about the conditions and circumstances. You only have to do one. You only have to share one. And then we'll have a little bit of a discussion about those conditions and circumstances and any themes that we can see there as we move forward when we think about commitment to this work. So yeah, so I think we're going on break, but leaving this prompt up. Sarah, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, do we want to adapt the length of the break to be 10 minutes, or do we want to give 15 and go longer?
I think coming back at 10:50 does seem good. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll take 10 minutes and we'll see you at 10:50.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. If you can let us know that you're back, either by turning your video on or making some other, using some emoji reaction, something like that, and then we have most folks back, we'll start again. Great. Maybe Carol and Norm. Oh, Catherine. Okay, we'll wait for another. Hi, Carol. Welcome back. So I'm waiting. I think we're waiting for Catherine and Norm.
Carol, you're muted.
I know, but I didn't actually need to give voice to what I was saying. I was just sort of saying, I'm here even if the video's off.
Great. Okay, I might get us slowly started, just to kind of reframe. Before we went on break, I described that the sharing of stories is a really powerful practice. I think in this work, it can help us understand those lived experiences that I've heard mentioned a few times. It can help you make meaning for why this work matters to you. So that's what I'd love for us to move into for the next 45 minutes or so. So again, it is sort of understanding what about this work has the potential for us to really connect to it if we aren't already. So the way this will work is you have the two prompts, which I realize are not on the screen, but the one is to describe, and that's fine, is to describe a time when you felt truly included, taking a few minutes to describe that, and then trying to reflect or share with us what were the conditions and circumstances that allowed you to feel that way. And then the other one is thinking about a time when you witnessed something unjust and describing that and reflecting again on those conditions and circumstances that allowed that injustice to happen. Knowing that we don't know everything, but just using our own experience and our own reflection to kind of share in the group. And that's kind of it. I'll keep an eye on time. We'll share out after this. We will walk through some of those commitments that the commission put together, which I adapted for our use. And then we're going to see, are there any other commitments that we heard or want to add to that list? Does that sound good? All right. Is there anyone who is ready to share with us?
I can.
Thank you.
I have a PhD in philosophy, and when I was an undergraduate at a small liberal arts college, which mind you is back in the day, and things are significantly different in certain regards nowadays, but back then, the entire department faculty was male, and there were very, very few women in any of my philosophy classes. Occasionally there were, a couple of us, but for the most part, not. And ironically, as I came to realize later, the professor that I worked most closely with was a complete misogynist. Years later, he basically told me in no uncertain terms that he just didn't think that as a woman I was suited to philosophy. So, really. Anyway, I went to graduate school, and that was the first time that, I had not had my consciousness raised as an undergraduate. So I knew the situation that I was in, but I didn't feel actively uncomfortable about it. But when I went to graduate school, a number of the professors in my department at that time were women. And one of them was working in the area of specialization that I was interested in. And we really hit it off. And it made such a huge difference to me to have another woman, to have a role model who was a woman, and just to see other women in the faculty of the department, because philosophy was then horrifically lacking in diversity. Like, it is the field of white males, and sadly, it continues to be one of the worst academic fields for that. It gets better very, very slowly over the years, but it sucks. So anyway, so conditions, circumstances, having somebody like you in the room, most of us, obvious exceptions here and there, but most of us don't have that problem in this group. So, I don't know.
Thank you for starting us off, Carol. Appreciate that story. So we're taking notes and we'll reflect a little bit after, but I want to move through stories. I think I saw Keith make a gesture. Is that to share? Thank you.
Yeah, I can go ahead. And so kind of building a little off of Carol's story, actually. So I was thinking more of witnessing unjust behavior, unjust situation, I guess. Similar situation, I had thinking about women in kind of the workplace. So I grew up in the Midwest, small town, relatively privileged lifestyle, and heavily privileged lifestyle by some metrics, and pretty oblivious to a lot of the challenges with diversity, equity, and inclusion growing up and through college. And in my profession, I work in wildlife and natural resources. For the past few decades, there's been a big push about women in wildlife for a lot of the same reasons, right? It's a very old white male dominated profession. And in school, most of my classes were actually closer to like 60% female, 40% male. And so I remember in grad school and in undergrad not being very supportive of the idea of women in wildlife as a support network or a necessary thing, right? Because I was competing for those same jobs and competing for those same opportunities and not seeing it. But so after I got a job, I had a female boss, and at a conference shortly after she had a baby that she brought with her to the conference. I just remember seeing her being very dismissed by a lot of the other male colleagues and older, the old guard of the profession around the conference. And so I feel like that was a really eye-opening situation for me, that then has led to a lot of her observations in various meeting rooms and those sort of things, particularly around the dismissal of my female colleagues by some of their male counterparts, and particularly the older male guard of our profession in a lot of situations. So I don't remember the other follow-up she had to that, but.
Yeah, it was just sort of reflecting a little bit on the conditions and circumstances. And it does feel similar to Carol's story in that there is just sort of this majority kind of normed culture that had all of the power and the privilege. And so their ability to judge the person you're describing and probably make her feel terrible.
Yeah.
Thanks. Catherine.
Yes. Well, about 15 years ago, I was standing in a grocery store checkout line, and the checker was being very friendly and chatty with the woman in front of me who was getting her food checked out. And when she came to me, she was very friendly and chatty. And as I was leaving and she took the next On the next woman, who was Black, she became suddenly very curt and borderline rude, and I was just shocked. I grew up in a liberal family, but not in a community of color. And it was really the first time I had seen such a blatant reaction to someone clearly based on their color. And I didn't say anything. I think I would have today, but I remember that. It was seemingly a small incident, but it really stuck in my mind how differently this woman was treated by a woman who had appeared to me to be very friendly, and I would have guessed was a really nice person. So that was just an experience that I had that stuck with me.
Thank you for sharing that. And there are probably some really deep conditions there, some historical accepted behaviors, right? And some codified into law, like how you can just actively treat people differently that shows up in a space that is seemingly innocuous, like a checkout line. Yeah. Thank you. Lois, you ready?
Yeah. I worked for many years with the Salem Kaiser Public School District as a special education assistant. And I had worked with one student for quite a long time, actually, but at this point, she was in 5th grade. She used a wheelchair. She had the use of her right arm, quadriplegic cerebral palsy. And I did some physical therapy with her. And I saw her once on the playground, and all by herself. Nobody was playing with her. And that was hard for me to see, because I didn't usually see her on the playground. I did some physical therapy with her. And then later that year, I was working with her on a mat, stretching and stuff. And she said, Mrs. Stark, I don't know what to do. And I said, what do you mean? What? I don't understand. I thought she meant she didn't know what I wanted her, like how to roll or stretch or whatever it was. And she said, I don't know what to do. And I said, well, tell me more. What's going on? And then she said, she was in 4th or 5th grade, I don't remember. She said, I know where my dad keeps his gun. And I said, what I mean, I really had no idea. And then it all came out that the girls in her class were very mean to her. She didn't have anybody to play with. Particularly in the PE class, the teacher didn't make adaptions for it, which was terrible. And so at that point, I just completely stopped what we were doing, and I said, we need to, talk about this. And so from then on, I kind of quit what I was supposed to be doing with her, and we talked about all the things that she could do as far as friendships. She could talk on the phone. She could watch movies. She could, it was limited, but we actually started doing some role playing. But anyway, that was me trying to help help her get into a position of power. But I was struck with the fact that at that age, she hurt so badly that I think she was thinking about killing herself.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that kind of loneliness really resonates in this work. Yeah, feeling of exclusion. Virginia?
Sure, I'll go next. So I guess to set up my story, I'll say that I grew up in a pretty conservative family in the Christian faith. And we had a very large family. I actually have 11 siblings. So there's 9 girls and 3 boys. And so in this kind of world, women are sometimes put on a different lower level. And a few years back, my husband and I decided to start a business, landscaping business, and invited my 2 brothers, younger brothers, to participate in that business. And so we were all equal owners, and the 2 boys ran the business, my brothers, and my husband and I were the financial, I guess, the financial backers of the business. And we did all the licensing and all that kind of things. And then I also ran all the billing and all of the customer issues and whatnot. And it came to a point in the business a couple years in that my brothers became, I'm not sure what the word is, but at a meeting, I was asked to give up my portion of the business because I was a woman and I was married, and therefore wasn't deemed worthy of what I was putting in, I guess. So it was an interesting feeling to sit at that meeting. Sorry. And to have all the work that you do be dismissed and undervalued, especially by those that you love and that are supposed to be family. So I just remember feeling really numb and dazed. Almost, I remember kind of the room taking on a weird feeling as I left. Yeah, kind of stripped of all your dignity, I guess, was a good way to feel, or a word for that. Yeah, and just really confused, I guess. But also a lot of clarity as far as these were the wrong people to be in business with. And kind of a resolution for my husband and I to just say, we got to get out. And of course, that took several more years of trying to get out of that situation, being financial backers. We've just pretty much lost everything. And 4 years of our lives, never making any money from the business. That all went to the people who were actually functioning. We were working full-time jobs on the side. And so we had our financial, we could make our mortgage and we could get our kids everything that they needed on a different source of income. So it was an interesting thing to be a part of. I'm not sure if they still feel that way or not. I would hope that they've grown and changed and seen how unfair or unjust that was, or that idea that because of my physical anatomy and my ring on my finger, that therefore I was deemed not worthy of a business portion. Sorry for getting emotional.
Never apologize for feelings. I know we're made to feel that we have to compartmentalize and they belong somewhere else, but I appreciate your vulnerability. else? I think we have a few more to share before we move on.
I guess, oh, Tricarico's going. I'll let Tricarico go.
Okay, so something that's been bouncing around in my head a lot is the conversation around who gets to be in what sports and what gender categories. So if you're following the Olympic sports, you know that Black women especially are being discriminated against. There's a variety of reasons of that. And I kind of want to highlight that because I think people don't realize that when we talk about trans rights and trans issues and not boiling people down to their chromosomes or not denying people access because of the hormones in their body, that actually protects cis women, right? Because the patriarchy and white supremacy wants all women or femme aligned people to fit a certain ideal, right? Which is like skinny, white, upper class, Christian, able-bodied, all those things. And when we allow that to perpetuate and allow it to become law or allow it to become a rule in the Olympics or allow it to be the basis of a policy, it actually ends up hurting cis women, right? Like cis women have been attacked in the bathroom for looking too masculine. And even though we've been having this conversation for a really long time, it's still happening. And it's happening to people who do have some privileges, right? Because if you're an Olympic athlete, you probably have access to a lot of things that maybe most people from your community don't have. And even with those things in place, that discrimination is still happening. So it's why I pretty much never shut up about this stuff, because it's not about me. Sure, I experience discrimination and I can talk about that too, but I'm more concerned about the people who don't have the privileges I have, because, you know, like I said before, every time I think I understand an issue, I see something else pop up and I'm like, okay, here we go again. So that's what's been on my mind a lot lately. And that's why I keep fighting for the things I'm fighting for.
Thank you for sharing that.
I want to make sure everybody has a chance. Like I said, I don't want to take up too much space here today, but I think I was talking yesterday with some folks at when the library had opened, because there's somebody on staff who lived in the same dorm that I did in college. And I went to college at IU, Indiana University. And there's actually several people in the state or in the library field who lived at that same dorm at various points, you know, like an odd proportion, considering that we now all live in Oregon. And I think the reason for that is because it was a very special dorm. It was a living learning center. So we took classes in the dorm. And it was the first place where I, coming from a small town, a conservative upbringing, and all of those kinds of things, felt truly like I had met people who had similar values and openness and expression of those values that I did. And it was the first place I really felt community. And the person who lived at the dorm a few years earlier than I didn't know them when they were at the dorm. We were talking about how it was kind of like a microcosm of Oregon in Indiana and had some similar values to a lot of the folks in Oregon. And so maybe that's what drew so many of us out here and so many of us to the library profession too. But I was really just thinking about that being the first place. And I just had a conversation, I just had a Zoom call with my college roommate and some of our friends from that same dorm environment. And I was just like, these are the people who I still keep in touch with after all of these years. And I do recognize that there is a lot of privilege wrapped up in that feeling of community too. You know, I think not everyone is white, but you know, probably the majority of the people who lived there were white. You know, we could pay or get loans or whatever to live in a dorm on a state university campus. All of those kinds of things also very much played into that. So
I don't want to say there's no privilege, but it definitely was the first place in a very conservative, very, what felt very narrow and closed in adolescence to actually be freer to be who I really am in that community and in that environment.
Thank you for sharing that. Just a few more. Any other stories to share with this group? Can I ask for those of you who aren't sharing a story, is this, are the conditions not right for you to do that? Okay.
For me, it's not about conditions. It's, I get in the context of this conversation, I have never been mistreated. And I realize that that's that's associated with privilege and where I grew up and who surrounded me. And so while I can strongly empathize, I don't feel like I have a story of something unjust happening to me. And in terms of welcoming, I'm white, and I grew up in a period of time where, in general, women were accepted and, in my experience, weren't discriminated against. So I feel like that privilege of being what I am and where I grew up didn't generally exclude me from anything. So I've always been welcome at everything. So I don't really have a specific story, but that's why I'm not saying a specific story.
I appreciate that, Kate. I appreciate you naming those things. Just gonna pause a little longer because I understand these can be tricky conditions. That I want to make sure that invitation is still out there. And I appreciate those of you who have been able to share. Okay. So that invitation is open for the rest of our time together. And so if you are moved, please, I was going to say send me a chat, but you can't do that. Just, I guess you're going to have to raise your hand or come off mute. But I want to transition us then into the work of really thinking about what binds us to this work. And so I heard a lot of people naming privilege, naming feeling included. I heard a lot of conditions about loneliness, or what maybe you witnessed as loneliness and exclusion, and you had empathy for, perhaps. I heard about the lack of accommodations or the lack of openness to things outside of dominant culture. I heard a lot of that. I heard the importance of representation, or of feeling like there is someone who is, like you, or relates to you, or has a similar shared experience as you, and the importance of that feeling for you to thrive and be happy. I heard a lot about things that I would consider historical, codified discrimination and bias. Absolutely permitted by law in many cases. Absolutely no consequence for discrimination and exclusion. I heard about undervalued labor and worth, a sense of just not being worth space, which is a very painful feeling. And I heard warnings about policies and codification, and that these are things that can affect those with privilege as well. Anything else that others have heard, kind of conditions, circumstances, and themes in these stories? And Sarah L., because I know you were taking notes, that invitation is to you as well if you see anything or heard anything.
I don't think I have anything different or more to add, Kathleen, than what you shared.
I think it was a very good summary.
Great. So these stories can do a couple things for us. They can bind us to one another, right? They can, even in this strange virtual space that we've been in for a while and maybe in for a little longer, we are trying to get to know each other, what connects us to this work. And it's also important for us to understand why this matters to us individually so that we can show up in this space collectively, to make sure as you go through your process, you are considering how things can be better, more equitable, more inclusive. So I want to share the next tool, which are equity commitments. Some groups, I'm going to share screen. Some groups use, let's see, they would call them shared values, for example. In strategic planning processes, we sometimes try to avoid the use of, because you work on values for the strategic plan as well, and it can be confusing. But whatever you call them, they're ways of connecting to the work and to reground yourself in the process to make sure that you're staying true. Remember what we're committed to. And so these are, again, 3 that I adapted from the commission in the Equity Lens draft. And they really do this really important work of reminding us that the conditions of today, there's a reason, right? That there are policies and practices and laws that have been established with the purpose of focusing power. So no mind toward equity with the purpose of exclusion. So that understanding state and our country's past in order to make sense of our present conditions and build a strong and better foundation for the next generation. One way of thinking of this is to hold history, but to not be held by history. And that there are good things, right, that we have been working on. We are resilient. And that even in this space of the city of Salem, there have been stories of resilience and efforts to continue to move this work forward. Another commitment that I adopted from that lens is the acknowledgement that systemic racism is one of the most devastating factors that hinder growth, acceptance, and inclusion for all people, especially people of color and Indigenous people. So that is language from that Equity Lens draft. And then the last commitment I adapted was a commitment to strive to transform systems into racially conscious and socially affirming environments where all people, especially people of color, Indigenous people, and their respective communities can grow and thrive. So I think you have the original document, which was very rich and full of, I can imagine the conversations that happened to create those. And I tried to create a couple of commitments that felt like they might be useful for this group and its process. So I guess first to pause there and think, any reactions to any of these commitments? Any questions? Any greater context about these commitments that people who worked on the original would like to share?
Yeah, so this was kind of an intro to provide some framework. And I think one of the best ways to summarize this in a really tangible way is something that fellow Commissioner Oni Marchbank said, is when we are creating something or doing something, especially when it's in the for a specific community, we have to ask ourselves, like, can they see it? Can they touch it? Can they feel it? Can they spend it? Right? Because I think so many times in our best intentions, we do things and we think that we're helping a community, but we're really not, And so I think that's what this is trying to get at, is not only do we need to be thinking about that, but we also need to think about why. Like, why is a certain community not getting that access? And I think Keith touched on this really well. Like, where's the action? Like, what are we actually doing? And that's something I think I find myself asking a lot, and I probably need to ask more. So I'm really glad that this group was already thinking about that, because that was kind of the why behind these statements, is understanding why those things are happening and why these issues have been historically a problem, especially in Oregon.
Thank you. And I think another kind of work these commitments do is really reminding us that pushing out of a personal experience with discrimination into what the conditions and circumstances are, right? Into the actual system, which does not want to change. It is doing fine. The people who uphold it don't really want it to change. And so there is a sense of, can you first see that, right? Being able to see and acknowledge that, and that it was created and designed through history. And that's why these things, these stories that we have, whether they're about exclusion or inclusion, whether they're about inequity or equity, they are steeped in the system, these structures, these policies, these practices. Any other questions or wonderings about these commitments? So now I'm hoping we can make a connection in just the next few minutes to see if there's any other commitments we would like to add. And thinking about the stories that you heard and the themes that you heard, is there anything else that you would like this group, the steering committee, to ensure that it is keeping centered? Go ahead, Sarah.
One of the things I keep kind of coming back to is the concept of dominant culture, kind of generally. And I'm really glad that these specifically call out racism and systemic racism and race as one of the dominant cultural pieces in particular, because I think that's probably the most important one to be calling out in this work and the hardest system to change. But I'm just sort of wondering if there's any room to maybe make a point of talking about trying to use equity for to shift those power balances across all dominant cultures. And I don't know how to say that. I don't know where to put that, but that, like, I've been hearing that kind of phrase echoing around in my head a lot with what we've been talking about. So
I just want to clarify, I might have the wrong preposition. So some way I talk about it sometimes is around status quo, resisting status quo. But do you mean within dominant culture or?
Right. Like I don't know how to say it, Kathleen. I guess I kind of mean that we are steeped in dominant culture, right? Like, and so all of this work that we're doing is trying to recognize and overcome that being steeped in dominant culture. So that's what I was trying to get at, but I don't have a great way of saying it. So
that was great. How you said it was great. And I captured a quick note, and we will work on the wordsmithing separately. Carol?
Okay. Successful. Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself. I think this is, if not the same thing, at least closely related to what is bothering Sarah. And I'm just wondering if, there's this, one of the items is acknowledge that systematic racism, blah, blah, blah. But I'm wondering if there isn't something that's a little closer to home, really. And if we should pay attention to the fact that, there's some diversity in our group, but not as much as one might wish for. And I guess I'm just speaking to what I think is maybe a need for acknowledging the privilege and relative homogeneity of this group itself, with the exception of Dr. Brown and a couple of other folks. We're all white. I think we've heard from various people's stories and whatnot, just what privileged backgrounds most of us have. So yeah, anyway, that's it.
I mean, is there pairing? Oh, before I speak, I see Sarah. Yeah.
Sorry, I think this might go to your point here a little too, and these are tied closely together, like race and class are probably, they're tied very closely together, and are things that the library in and of itself is meant to help with equity in class issues particularly. And there's a long history of racism in who libraries were trying to uplift too. So I want to be able to acknowledge the interplay of those two things, and that, yes, to Carol's point, it sounds like we have a lot of privilege overall in this group, possibly on both of those counts.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I wonder then what the commitment in response to that could be. Right? So yes, acknowledging. And we heard stories about being in spaces where people seem to represent something about you that was helpful, even when there weren't many of you, right? That it was helpful. I heard about how we value the stories, the labor. How will we bring those into this space is a way of shifting that commitment, right? Away from this privilege and homogeneity. So is there a commitment someone can think about, can craft there about how you will account for that or adjust for that? Keith.
So I don't have that wording for you, but something I was thinking about along these lines is and I think Dr. Brown referenced this a little bit earlier, is these three commitments here don't feel personal enough in some ways, and I wonder if kind of what you were getting at there, help adding a personal element of what we will do could be useful. Right, I was looking at the third bullet there, the second bullet, systemic racism. I think I generally get that. The third bullet, transform systems, and I don't know what that means entirely and what that looks like, right? And it strikes me as racism is an adaptive leadership problem where you got to change hearts and minds of the people involved, and so adding a personal element, I think, to this list of commitments could be useful for our group.
What you're bringing up, Keith, Kathleen mentioned earlier that these commitments, you could also use the terminology values to describe these. And when we think about values in the context of a strategic plan, and how they will be used to carry out the strategic plan, it's very much about thinking, how do I use these values to inform my day-to-day choices? And so often we'll take those values and ask an organization to think about, what does this look like, sound like, feel like in action? How would we know if we were in fact upholding this value or this commitment? So I really like that idea as a way that we could bring more meaning and personal connection and commitment to these commitments. I don't know that we'll be able to do that right here now today. So Kathleen and I might have to think about that. Might be something that we collaborate on, and a virtual document, between now and our next meeting, is coming up with some ideas of what that might look like, sound like, feel like.
Yeah, and we have some notes, and I took some notes on the stories from which values are showing up as well. So maybe I think that's a great idea, and I captured that there. And Lois, I see you.
I was just thinking about what Keith said about making it personal, and then also about what Tricerico said in their comments, that they were seeking out opportunities to find out about different cultures and communities and things like that. And I like that word, seeking out, or going out of your comfort zone. And I think that's something that I think that I would like to do that more as in my role at the library, to understand where we're missing groups that aren't seen or heard. And I like that seeking out piece that they brought up.
Great, thank you. I tried to capture that as well as something to add in our document. Yeah, Virginia.
Yeah, just going off of Lois's comments. Personally, I'm just, I guess the challenge on council or with this for me personally is taking my understanding of my own privilege, and then knowing that I'm going into a space where I'm going to be making decisions for other people that I don't necessarily understand their struggle or their lived experience. And so just really looking forward to the public outreach and making sure that that is done to the best that we possibly can to gain those voices to the table. And then doing my own work as far as going out into my own neighborhood and trying to get a diverse conversations going with so many different people, so that I can kind of gain a better understanding of what's needed and like how this group is going to help our neighborhoods and our communities throughout the city. I don't know if that's making sense at all, but just really looking forward to the outreach part of this process. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah, go ahead, Sarah, if you're building.
Yeah, I'm building off that. I do want to say, that's been incredibly important. And I think that's and it's a really good point that we need to do the outreach to these groups in our community who aren't represented here to really help get voices in. And we've been developing our outreach plan with that in mind, including having the survey translated into Chuukese, Marshallese, Russian, Spanish, and English, of course, and then it will be available in paper and online as well, so that we are getting as many voices as we can. And not to like get too deeply into the nuances of that, but I did sort of want to say that that has been a guiding principle for our outreach, and I'm glad to hear it echoed here as well.
Yeah, me too. So I tried to capture that here as well. And I know we have some Equity Lens questions that also ask if we are doing that work. Yeah. All right, so I am going to start to wrap us up on these commitments, and just naming that there are some pluses, some adds that we need to sort of shape a little better. There is still a question about sort of the personal equity commitments or values that individuals are bringing into the space. Another thing that these tools do is they help hold us accountable, right? They're transparent in that we are building this together. We have heard the conversations that went into the document, and now we have a document to hold us accountable as we move forward. So it's the regular using of the tools and the asking of the questions. All right, so same as with the past two segments, knowing that this is a work in progress, I'm looking for some thumbs ups from folks to say, these are the commitments. We are going to show up committed to doing the work, holding these principles, values in mind. Thank you. Maybe Piper or Keith, did you do one and I didn't? I missed it. All right, we might have had some folks step away to take care of some needs, so that's fine. But we will, I think, so the way the tools work is you kind of go back at every session and you recommit, usually as a slate, not individually, but as a slate, and then you make some edits. So that's a typical process with these tools. All right, I feel comfortable moving forward into the last part of our day, which is really looking at the questions that we'll ask. So transitioning into that space, stop sharing for a little bit. And just to say that when we hear about equity lenses, a lot of lenses really are just a set of questions. I think they are helpful though to have these other contexts, like how you are going to use the lens, I think is really important. That's the guidelines. What do you mean with some of the words? Those are the shared definitions. What are your commitments or values that attach you to the work, which we just worked on? And the next part is really a set of questions. And again, we drew from the Commission's work to develop some that might be most useful for this group moving forward. As I believe Sarah S. noted, the consulting team will use these documents as well when thinking about community engagement, for example. When vetting I think it's called, it used to be called the Insight Report. Is it a situation assessment? Is that what it's called?
Yes, a situation assessment in this case, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So when putting that together, these tools will be helpful during the process. So when things get stuck or things need to move along, facilitators will also use these tools for that reason. And again, as I mentioned, to hold this group accountable to the work that it's committing to do in this space. So with that, I'll share screen. I always wonder if people get motion sick just jumping back and forth, back and forth. Sometimes I do really fast, and I'm sure it does have that effect, but I'm trying to be slow today. Okay, so equity lens questions, again, adapted from the work of the Human Rights Commission, use at key decision points. And I tried to group them by theme so that it perhaps can be used when you know you're thinking about community engagement, for example. It doesn't mean that's exclusively the only way you'll use these questions. So here it's walking through the questions. Going to pause and give everyone a moment to read engagement, data, impacts, and moving beyond status quo, which we touched on a little bit. So maybe just a couple minutes and I'll check back. Okay, we're going to have these discussions in small groups. So if you have the link and are able to take that into the space with you, that would be great. Let's see. I put the prompts at the bottom. So really looking at these questions, which are the ones, yeah, we cannot lose this question through this process. Which questions need some modification, and which questions are, what's missing? What would you add? And again, these will be used at key decision points in particular, and they will help guide the process. Sarah, I know you're setting up rooms. I'm trying to make kind of an adjustment on time. If we want to do some share out, what do you recommend if we want to save 10 minutes?
I don't think that we'll need the full 10 minutes for the closing. So I think we can take 5 minutes from there. So then that would mean ending by 12:25, which means we're actually in a pretty good place. So I still think we could give, maybe we give 18 minutes for the breakout rooms.
Sure.
Does that work? Okay.
Sure. And so going into those spaces, again, introduce yourself if you haven't been in a small group together. Important to select a note taker in this case, and also a spokesperson who can kind of share when we come back to large group. And Sarah, how many groups are there?
So right now I have us set up with 3 groups. So there's 2 groups of 3 and 1 group of 4. Piper, I want to just make sure that you're still with us and able to actively participate in a group. Otherwise, I may rearrange. Good. Thank you. Good. Yeah. So we've got 3 groups.
All right. And so it's clear what the work for the next several minutes is together, reading through the questions, having a discussion, prompts at the bottom of the document. Okay, great.
So we'll give you a heads up, but it looks like we'll come back around like 12:08 or so, but we'll give you maybe a 5-minute warning and then a 1-minute warning. All right, I'll open the rooms and we'll see you all a little after 12.
Thanks, Sarah. So I need a bio break.
Okay.
I'll be back.
Sounds good. Kathleen, I'm just realizing I totally missed the 5 minute. So I'm going to give them a 1 minute.
Oh, you don't have it set on timed open?
I don't think I can.
With the little gear? You don't have access to the gear?
I
know I'm struggling a little bit with the.
I think we do not have full functionality. So.
And are you note taking on this section, or am I? You are, right? Or
yeah, and I'm sorry, if I missed it last time, you were kind of in there, but I'm happy to. I can do it this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, we'll shoot for wrapping by between 12:20 and 12:25.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
I don't know. I'd put this thing about commitments follow-up.
Oh, I did that. Yeah, I was just thinking that might be something that I invite people to do individually.
Got it.
Yeah.
That sounds good. Welcome back. Almost done.
Kathleen, an interesting nuance I did get on sharing the document. I think because we're sharing it in view mode with folks, they can't in the document see our suggested edits.
Oh, maybe I'll update that.
Yeah.
Comments.
Thanks for pointing that out, Keith.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to add that. Was it Keith you said that?
Yeah.
Keith, will you refresh and check and see if you can see them now? Because we do have a lot of comments and edits. Great. Learn something new. Yeah. All right, welcome back, everyone. We're going to take, 12 to 15 minutes, maybe, if we need it, to kind of talk about these questions. I'm hoping to go group to group. So if there's a group with a spokesperson who is ready to jump in and share, I would appreciate that. And again, it's just really thinking about which of the questions felt most important, what modifications would you recommend, what questions would you add, kind of generally high level of what you discussed in your small group.
I can start off. It was Kate and Carol and I discussing, and I think the questions we saw as most important were probably the engagement questions at the top. And Carol and Kate jump in whenever I say something wrong. But the particularly the ones about groups not being represented. But then that kind of sparked a discussion on how are we defining groups and what does a group mean? And how are we defining them being represented, however we define group. And I think we tended to circle more around the idea of a group being a community, like the Latino community being a entity. But then I think there's a question of how are we defining them, that community being represented in this process. and I don't know that we had any answers to that, but that was sort of the questions being asked around the meaning behind those questions. And then another piece that we had on that was the question around who are the groups that are not represented. I think a meaningful question could be to kind of follow up on that is exploring why aren't they represented? Is it for lack of outreach? Is it for lack of inclusivity? Is it a statement that group is making to say we don't want a part of this? Is it the sort of exploration question behind that? So that was kind of that thing. The other question that we discussed a bit was the one is who is most burdened by this initiative or policy? And I think we didn't like the phrase burdened or the word there. And we struggle with the idea that we think of things as a zero-sum game. And I think we started to circle around rephrasing that as, is there loss associated with this change in policy or new initiative? The idea that any change comes with a loss for somebody, potentially, and we should be cognizant of that change. Doesn't mean it will stop us from moving forward in that initiative or policy, but we should at least be aware of it.
Also, maybe we didn't say this in the group, but perceived loss. I think some of us had an experience a couple of years ago with the library that suggested that this could be as significant as anything, which is, if people, whether they are or not, if people feel like they're losing something, then that can be a huge problem, one way or another. So something about loss, but also about perceived loss, and whether that loss is something that we care to recognize, right? If the loss is the privilege of white supremacy or something, I mean, I think Kate's sense is, yeah, that's not a loss that we regret. That would be more to the point of, yeah, let's get rid of that shit. So
okay.
And then I had one more comment. We actually didn't bring this up in the group because I didn't have time to get to it, but on the data question, I think there's a question there of what data do we have to inform this initiative or policy? And I think it could be useful to ask is something along the lines of, is there data that we're missing that could be useful to informing or to helping us advance this policy?
Mm-hmm.
What data do we need, I guess is the question.
Yeah.
And what data will we have access to? I'm not really aware of, beyond the survey, what other data we'll have access to.
Okay.
We might also think about whether we could somehow look for data that would help us with the representativeness or lack thereof, right? I mean, I was commenting that, for a lot of the Latino community, we have people who are active in politics and all of that, but they, on the whole, are among the most privileged members of the community. And whereas, I think one of the things that we most want to reach out to from the library is the less privileged, class privileged in particular, members of that community. Mm-hmm. And those folks are too, they are too busy trying to make a living to, work on committees and boards by and large. But maybe we could get not representation, but at least more input from them if we focused data acquisition on them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for all of these. Lots of things to unpack there. The first thing I want to do is take responsibility for the use of the word burden. That was not in the original document. I fall sometimes into that language of burden and benefits. And burden, I don't think of as entirely full loss, although I appreciate the reference to not a zero-sum game. I think of burden as labor sometimes. And so I guess I just will say that I'm not attached to the language. And then the other thing is I really appreciated hearing more about when you said perceived loss, because initially I go to, well, if someone says it's a loss and they're most impacted, it's a loss. But I understand more because of your explanation, Carol. I do want to encourage you to just continue to circle around the idea that community voices and community experiences are valid and valued, and that we believe them, right? And so, but I hear the nuance of the description you're particularly mentioning, and that would be a complicated one. Alma, just saw your hands. Sorry about that.
Oh, I mute myself. So one of the things that came up in our group was what is meant by data. So not just isolating to just like metrics, but like qualitative. So, listening to people, interviews, things like that. The other thing that we spent some time on was moving beyond the status quo. So basically like oftentimes, the voices of marginalized communities are asked to kind of come on board on like commissions and such, but they're not being paid for it. And the reality is that you're asking them for their intellectual property. So it's like, are there any stipends or compensation in order for them to be able to participate, and valuing them for their time? Another thing that was brought up was how can we support the local experts that we have here in Salem, versus like, maybe getting somebody who is not from Salem and may not have that that sort of inside knowledge of what it's like to live here, to work here, and bringing that more into this work.
Great. All great things to note. The data one, so again, yes, qualitative, and remembering that stories count, experiences count, right? And sometimes they are undervalued. And I would add to the question of compensation for participation and say sometimes the question is, what would meaningful compensation be for you? Because sometimes it isn't just really about the dollars or the gift card. It is like some other conditions that would make it possible for folks to fully participate. So again, centering in community voice, when community tells you what it needs and what it wants, and believing that. Yeah, great. Catherine, was that a hand? Oh, I saw Virginia come off. I'm sorry, I looked away briefly. I don't know who was up first.
Yeah, we were all in a group together and we were all fighting about who was going to talk when we got kicked out. And I'll try, but I think others will have to backfill where I missed, because we literally talked the entire time. There was no quiet time whatsoever. And so lots to unpack. And Sarah took notes. So I'm just going to put the bulk on this responsibility on her. So we did talk a lot about moving beyond the status quo. What does that mean? Making sure that we expand on who that includes. I'm going to move my screen here so I can see. There was one word that we did not, that we wanted to expand upon. It was underserved communities. We wanted to broaden that. Who is that? We also felt like it was important to bring up class and socioeconomic class, really call that out, as well as immigration status and refugee. We felt like that was really important to include here. And of course, my tidbit was calling out, oh Lord, just misogyny and that whole aspect of that layer to our society. And help me out, girls. What did we miss? Oh, we were talking about what level of education do we base our grammar and our word choice on? The city, I believe we were saying is a 8th grade education. And I was saying that the state, I believe, is at a 6th grade education. And the reason this came up is that I had trouble understanding the second bullet point under data. I had to read that a few times and maybe thought there was a typo. And then that brought up the conversation that maybe I need a 6th grade one and not an 8th grade one. But at any rate, you guys can laugh. So that was part of our conversation. What else am I missing, guys?
I think we also talked about the neutrality of data and the concept of neutrality in data, and that data points, if you're doing quantitative data, data points themselves are just data points, but the way that you gather those data points and how you analyze and interpret those data points is where the bias comes in. So we were thinking about that. And then we also talked about sort of a spectrum of ability and neurodiverse, neurotypical, and, you know, differently in ability, able-bodied versus people who might have different levels of able-bodiedness as well. And then we talked a lot about engagement and importance of engagement. Virginia, that was you. And Lois wanted to point out with the engagement as well that, you know, hitting the population who doesn't use the library in our questions. And somebody had asked a question earlier about some of the other data that will come in beyond the survey. And Coraggio does have the original Orange Boy survey from 2018, that work, which does identify some different segments of the population, including people who don't use the library and why they don't use the library, which was very interesting. And I sort of took over there. Sorry, I want to make sure that Catherine, Lois, and Virginia have more.
Thank you.
Well, we just spent some time talking about barriers to create more equitable outcomes, and a variety of barriers that might include location within the community. Where do certain segments of the community live? Is it near or far to the library? Parking, fees, you know, monetary consideration, access to, you know, housing. Do people even have homes and cars to get to the library? Computers. Do people have access even to the online programs that the library offers? That sort of thing.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Anything else you want to make sure we capture? Okay. So again, a living document. I think this one has enough added to it that we shouldn't do a vote to approve, but that we should refine, bring it back, Sarah, and then sort of work through and see if that looks closer or better.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I went back through the notes for just a second, and I did see that we did talk about the last one under impact, and sort of the having that bias, that being one of the most important questions, I think was one of the ones that we were talking about as being very important.
Great. All right. Looking at the time, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah when you're ready. And just to say, yay, even if this is not formally approved, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of great work that's been done in this space today. So thank you for your participation in that.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Kathleen just shared. I mean, as we discussed At the outset, of course, there was a goal in producing an equity lens composed of these 4 tools for us to use. But another significant goal or intent for this time together was to build relationships, build shared understanding, to have this dialogue, to come to hear some of one another's stories and perspectives, so that we can then lean on these tools together to hold us accountable throughout the process. So I look forward to continuing, Chris and I will commit to continuing to bringing these, the equity lens and these tools into the process. And we invite all of you, all of us are responsible for ensuring that we do that together collaboratively. So look forward to doing that. So in terms of next steps, Kathleen and I will do some, refinement based on the comments and suggested edits or adds that came from the group today. So we'll have, as we mentioned, these will be living documents. So we'll have the next proposed revised documents for you the next time that we come together. The next time that we come together will be once the outreach has been completed and we have the situation assessment, and we will be launching our strategic planning work together, reviewing and starting to make meaning of that situation assessment. However, in the meantime, we'll be inviting all of you to encourage and promote and share information about the survey, and making sure that it gets out far and wide, and participating in the survey yourselves too. So even though you're part of the committee, we invite you to participate personally as well. Yeah, Lois.
So we spent all this time looking at our lens. So are we going to be able to see the questions that go out in the survey to see if they meet our standards that we just set?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, one where I will acknowledge the inherent challenge of, timing and scope. And so we are in this case asking that you entrust Coraggio Group and the strategic planning work that we do to design a survey that we believe will get us the information that we need to inform the strategic plan. In terms of,
I don't know that I can do that.
So Lois, it's already been translated, like it's about to go live. So there's not an opportunity for this group to be able to do that. And when we've already arranged with a consultant or another group, a vendor to do the translation for us.
So
and it's a matter of training.
This does not seem. So why did we do this today?
So we'll be using these tools throughout our strategic planning process. This is the group that will be coming together to make meaning of the input that we get through the surveys and the interviews and the focus groups. And so we'll use this equity lens to guide our process and to guide the decisions, to determine what shows up in the plan, how things show up.
To me, I think the important part is getting the word out for this group. And then when we come back and have the data to assess, and that data and bias part is really important to me. And so I think having this lens for the assessment and analysis, and looking at all of the information that we get back is where I see this group playing into that part of the process.
Thanks, Sarah. So we'll also be in touch. I think I will, especially on the commitments. It sounded like there was some interest in reflecting around what these look like in action. So we'll follow up and invite some more personal reflection around what it is that you want to commit to related to those commitments as well. So I'm aware of our time and just again want to express gratitude for everyone's involvement today. Virginia, I see your hand, and just want to let people feel free to drop off if you need to.
Yeah, I was just wanting the admin email that I can send the notes to.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yes. Let's see. Clarissa, are we able to get that from you? And I can I can share my screen and put it up there.
Yes, so it's SPL admin at cityofsalem.net.
Thank you so much for remembering that.
So Keith, are you willing to send the notes for our group? We didn't discuss that, but thank you.
Great. So I've got that up on my screen in case you missed it. Thank you to our
It looks like you
takers.
put it in the document that we all have access to right?
I can do that. This is a different one, but I will do that as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Perfect. That's a good way to get it back. Great.
Sarah?
All right.
Catherine
Sarah?
had a question.
Yes, will you be sending the OLA EDI toolkit out to all of us, or a link to it?
Yeah.
The link is in the email, Catherine.
Which email?
It's in the email that I sent with the agenda and the preparation. So all those attachments. And then the fourth bullet is the OLA resource guide, and it's a link, a hyperlink. But please feel free to let me know if that doesn't work for you and I can send it again.
It didn't work. It didn't work for me. I just got a 2-page anti-racism statement from OLA.
Okay, we'll make sure you get it. I'll send it to everyone. I'll send a link to the toolkit to everybody.
Norm said he didn't get it either.
Okay, apologies then if I included the wrong links. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course.
All right, Kathleen, anything else you want to say in closing?
No, just yay. That's 2.5 hours of great work. Really, really, it's important to take the time to acknowledge that work, that collaboration, to celebrate, even if just with a little emoji. I actually don't know what that is, but confetti, I guess. And
celebrate.
So thank you all for your participation and for showing up really fully in this space.
Thanks, everyone.
I really want to thank you, Kathleen, and Sarah, for being very intentional and thoughtful and helping lead us through this. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right.
Take care, everyone.
Take care, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.